My name is Adrian Cole, and I knew my future at Sterling Financial Group ended the instant Senior Vice President Marcus Holloway accepted applause for a compliance framework I had spent weeks creating. He stood confidently before the executive board in a perfectly tailored navy suit, speaking as though every safeguard had come from his own brilliant mind. Meanwhile, I remained in the back of the conference room, exhausted after another 80-hour work week spent balancing my full-time job with demanding late-night business law classes. No one mentioned my contribution. That silence wasn't unusual. For nearly a year, I had become the company's invisible insurance policy. Whenever executives wanted to bypass mandatory regulatory procedures to inflate quarterly results, they called me. My responsibility was simple: protect the firm from catastrophic legal exposure. Unfortunately, doing the right thing rarely earned appreciation. Instead, I became known as the employee who constantly delayed exciting business opportunities with tedious compliance requirements. Eventually, I stopped expecting recognition. Rather than fighting every political battle, I quietly began preparing my escape. Every evening after work, I carried my laptop into the same neighbourhood diner, ordered black coffee, and devoted hours to graduate coursework. While executives celebrated short-term victories, I invested in a future that didn't depend on their approval. Things became significantly worse when Marcus convinced the board to hire his wife, Vanessa Holloway, as the firm's new director of workplace culture. She arrived wearing designer pastel suits and endless confidence, introducing mandatory workshops about positivity, emotional alignment, and corporate happiness. Her favourite question quickly became, should compliance really create so much negativity? I nearly laughed the first time I heard it. Federal regulations weren't optional suggestions. They existed because companies collapsed when leadership ignored them. Still, everyone applauded her presentations. While employees attended motivational seminars, I spent late nights correcting documentation Marcus had deliberately softened to make risky decisions appear harmless. Every revised report, every emergency audit, and every legal safeguard landed on my desk. When problems disappeared, executives congratulated themselves. When problems appeared, they expected me to solve them overnight. Eventually, I stopped arguing during leadership meetings. Most people assumed I had finally accepted defeat. They were wrong. Instead of debating impossible personalities, I documented everything. Every instruction arrived through email. Every approval carried a timestamp. Every shortcut bore an executive signature. Compliance wasn't built on opinions. It survived through evidence. By the time anyone realized I had collected a complete record of every reckless decision inside the company, it would already be far too late. The breaking point arrived during the firm's annual networking reception at the elegant Riverside Grand Hotel. Under glowing string lights and surrounded by executives balancing expensive cocktails, Vanessa made sure everyone could hear her latest performance. "So, Adrian," she said with a patronizing smile, "I hear you're still taking law classes. That's adorable. Hopefully one day you'll stop treating this company like a stepping stone and fully commit to us." Several board members exchanged uncomfortable smiles before politely laughing. Nobody defended me. I simply raised my glass, thanked her for the advice, and walked away. 4 hours later, Human Resources called me into a private conference room. The conversation sounded rehearsed from beginning to end. The HR director nervously praised my technical ability before explaining that my personality no longer reflected the company's positive cultural vision. Although my work had been exceptional, they believed my serious approach discouraged collaboration. Then came the severance package. Ironically, the separation agreement they slid across the table contained legal clauses I had personally written years earlier to protect the company during executive departures. I quietly read every page before placing it back on the table. "I won't be signing this today," I said calmly. After thanking the HR representative for her time, I picked up my coat and left without another word. They believed replacing me would be effortless. Before leaving the building, I reviewed one final detail. As the officially registered Chief Compliance Officer, my appointment had been filed with federal regulators years earlier. Removing someone from that position required immediate regulatory notification and formal documentation. Until those filings were updated, I remained the legally recognised compliance officer, regardless of what internal management claimed. Apparently, nobody else remembered that requirement. The following morning, I returned only long enough to collect personal belongings from my office. Dozens of unread emails filled my inbox as junior attorneys begged for guidance on pending regulatory issues. I ignored everyone. Instead, I drafted a concise resignation letter addressed to executive leadership. I clearly stated my immediate resignation and reminded them, one final time, to update every required federal filing without delay. I left my keycard at reception, surrendered my laptop, and walked out into the cool morning air feeling lighter than I had in years. By lunchtime, a former colleague texted me screenshots from inside the office. Marcus had announced that Vanessa would oversee compliance until further notice. According to him, updating regulatory records was just paperwork. I smiled, closed my phone, and returned to outlining my graduate capstone on corporate governance. They had just mistaken a legal obligation for an administrative formality. Within 48 hours, Sterling Financial Group began unravelling. The legal department finally discovered that the company was operating without a properly registered chief compliance officer. Junior attorneys warned executives that the oversight violated federal reporting requirements, but Marcus refused to admit anything was wrong. Vanessa tried to calm employees by sending a company-wide email filled with motivational quotes about teamwork, optimism, and staying focused during temporary challenges. It solved nothing. The next morning, while I was quietly working at a neighbourhood coffee shop on my graduate capstone, an unexpected email arrived from an attorney at the Securities and Exchange Commission. He explained that a routine compliance review was scheduled for the following day, and that he looked forward to meeting with me. I answered immediately. I informed him that I had resigned earlier that week and recommended he coordinate directly with the firm's internal legal department. Then I forwarded the entire exchange to my personal attorney for documentation. The dominoes began falling. Federal officials arrived at company headquarters the next morning requesting documentation identifying the active compliance officer. The receptionist admitted I no longer worked there. Inside the executive offices, panic spread from conference room to conference room as managers searched desperately for paperwork that didn't exist. It became even worse when investigators discovered someone had submitted regulatory filings using my credentials after my resignation. That single mistake transformed a simple compliance failure into a potentially serious legal matter. By afternoon, financial news outlets reported that Sterling Financial Group was under federal investigation for regulatory violations. Former co-workers flooded my phone with frantic messages, while reporters requested interviews. I declined every request. Instead, I placed the news headline on the opening page of my graduate capstone as a real-world example of leadership failure and institutional risk. Days later, the board instructed its attorneys to offer me a lucrative consulting contract. They wanted me to repair the damage, organise the missing records, and quietly stabilise the situation before regulators impose substantial penalties. My attorney responded with one brief paragraph. The answer was no. I also submitted archived emails, executive approvals, and time-stamped documentation through official whistleblower channels, allowing investigators to see the complete picture. During the company's quarterly earnings call, investors demanded answers about the growing investigation. The chief executive stumbled through vague explanations before accidentally confirming the inquiry live on air. Within hours, the company's stock tumbled, major clients withdrew their business, and Vanessa quietly disappeared from her executive position. Months later, I presented my completed capstone before future business leaders. My former employer became the perfect lesson in one simple truth. Arrogance can silence an employee, but meticulous records, patience, and integrity will always speak louder than power.